Welcome to Chit Chat with Manoj. I am Manoj Singh. Hello, Adab, Namaste. After a brief hiatus, we and a break, we resume our talk show Chit Chat with Manoj. Let's talk about real issues of South Asian community in the US. So tonight we start with the series Life-Changing Events, and topic for tonight is 9/11 on its 20th anniversary. For tonight's discussion, our guests are Niharika Chiburjo. She's an assistant director at the Japan US Friendship Commission. Welcome. Surinder Deol, a well known author. One of his latest books is a biography of Sahir Ladwanvi Sahib. Welcome, Surinderji.
Thank you.
Shirish Nene, he wears multiple hats. He's a president, director, board member, and has his own company, consultant. And welcome, Shirish.
Thank you.
And last, Dr. Shehzad Rahman, who's a practicing psychiatrist
Hello,
in
everybody.
Arabia for a long time. Hello. Before we start this discussion tonight, we want to remember all the fellow citizens who we lost on that day. Salute to all the heroes, firemen, police, common men, citizens, colleagues who rushed in to help. We will never forget them, and we'll never forget this day. I still remember it was a clear, sunny morning. I had already reached my work, and my morning ritual is normally having a coffee. And then while I'm having my first coffee, I would read my things to do for that day, all the priorities and schedule. And a teammate came by and said that there's a plane which crashed into World Trade Center. And, so my first inkling was pilot, a small plane, something, didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it and went back to work. But then after a few minutes, a second colleague came and said, no, the building is burning and there is something not right. And the rest is history. We all remember that day. We were let go early in the afternoon. I reached home from Reston to my home in Potomac in almost 2-3 hours. There was traffic jam because everyone was let go. There was cell phone jam. No one could reach each other. We had reached our peak capacity. And it was a very somber day. I was confused. I was afraid. I was a little bit, sad. A lot of emotions were going through. And we all know what happened after that. A new federal department was formed, Homeland Security. All the federal government buildings were secured. The airport was managed by government, by TSA. A whole lot of changes took place. And our life changed forever. America trusted the whole world, was the superpower. We enjoyed a lot of benefits. I went on a lot of international travel on my business as an expat, and it was now very different. So I'll go around the panel and ask the same question. Where were you? What do you remember? And how did you feel, Niharika?
Thank you, Manoj. I appreciate that you're holding space for this today because as we go about our daily work, it's in the back of our minds, but we don't bring it forward because it was so traumatic. For me, like I said to you before we entered the live stream, I remember what I was wearing. I remember exactly where I was. Like you, I was at work. And I wasn't yet a US citizen. I wasn't yet a permanent resident. I was a student. I was still on a student visa, and I was on my practical training period, which made it a very precarious situation for me. I work with Japan. I had just come back from Japan the day before. I was in my office, and somebody turned on the TV and said, "Come and look. There's this random plane that's flying around the World Trade Center. And we thought it was just some plane. And like you, we kept going back to our desks and then coming back. And then my boss came in and said, "We need to leave. Why are you guys standing here and watching this? We need to get out. Something bad is coming." Because by then in DC we were hearing that there was a bomb at the State Department. I don't know if you all remember that. There was a hoax about that. We started hearing that there was a plane bound for the Pentagon. I lived across the river. I was working in DC. I live in Northern Virginia. I had to get home. I had to call my parents. I didn't own a cell phone. I was still just barely out of being in student mode. So it was panic. There was panic in the streets. People were being very kind. They were offering to share cabs. Other people were being really nasty. They were pushing you out of the way and taking the cab from under your nose. So it was this very panicky situation when we didn't know what was going on. So I'll leave it there and I'll listen to what others have to say.
Surendraji?
Uh, I worked for the World Bank at that time, and there was a meeting with a consultant that was getting postponed for one reason or the other. And then I used to reach my office around 9 o'clock. So I said, why on that particular day we have that meeting? So there are 4 or 5 of us in a closed conference room. The meeting started around 8 o'clock, and around 8:20 or so, a colleague of ours, he opened the door. He said, "What are you guys doing sitting here? The world is changing. America is under attack." I said, "What are you talking? I don't understand." He said, "Come out and see." And we all left and we came to a common area where there was one TV which was on and dozens of staff were gathered. So, so somebody said that even Pentagon has been attacked. So we went, some of us went to the ninth floor. I couldn't see the fire, but I saw some smoke. So it was kind of so sudden that one could not make any sense out of it. What's happening? Why, as you said, America, a superpower, spent so much money on defense with such intelligence kind of apparatus we have. How could things go wrong in such a way, fundamental way? So we kind of lingered on. I think there was some a misstep by World Bank security. They should have closed the bank immediately because we were so close to White House. They didn't do that. So around maybe midday, I left the bank, I left my car in the garage, and I just traveled by metro because I knew roads are going to be so full that you won't be able to move your vehicle. So I came and I reached my home. My wife was still at work. So I spent the afternoon watching TV, the same scene which is being repeated time and again. But I will have to say more about that after we go around. In the second round, I'll say how that particular event had a very transformative influence on my life.
Shazad?
Uh, well, I was in a staff meeting at 8 o'clock, and in the conference room where there was a TV on the wall. A little while later, within 10 to 15 minutes, there was commotion. The receptionist came in, patients who were scheduled in the waiting rooms and things. You could hear the commotion. And we turned the TV on, and we immediately learned what was going on. I had maybe a self-centered or self-preserving first reaction to that. As a Muslim professional, my then wife, she was University of Chicago educated lawyer. I was a psychiatrist at an Ivy League university in a clinical faculty practice. So I had two reactions. First was anger, knowing who had done it, at these people where, about what future will hold for someone with my background. I knew about the 1993 attempt at the World Trade Center. The coal in USS Cole in Yemen had happened. And up until that point, I must say that in our life, there was a peripheral recognition that, yes, I was born in a Muslim family in India, and that was also an identity. more to do with Urdu language and food, and rather than any religious feelings. But I had a fairly decent inkling after the first reaction of horror that it was going to be different for me in vis-a-vis who I am. And for example, anything that happens, one of the first things, as many Muslim writers and professionals that they say, they pray, even if they, whether they believe or not, that God, hope it's not someone Muslim, someone who is not a terrorist, and this constant need to explain, that happens. So in that regard, uh, my own personal life changed. Later in the day, I heard from my cousin, whose son was looking for his fiance, who was in the World Trade Center. She perished there, and Jamil was carrying her photo everywhere, asking people where she was. So there was some goings on in the family, but those are my main concern. I also had this feeling that there was going to be a massive reaction to this. America, even with Pearl Harbor, there was no mainland uh, vulnerability in America. It's surrounded by two large oceans and two friendly countries. America was fully protected, not to mention its massive military, etc. And I had an inkling that this was going to be another era, because there had been no attack on the mainland. So anyway, I don't want to take too much time, but these were some of my feelings going through my head.
Shirish.
So 20 years later, that day still seems so real. But that day, the one word I'd use to describe it is surreal. I was driving into the office. Normally I listen to the news, but I was on calls that day all throughout. I got in, I knew I had a vendor coming in to make a presentation. I wanted to get some things out of the way, and all of a sudden I get a call from a friend who says, "Hey, did you hear this plane crashed into the Twin Towers?" And I said, okay, some kind of a freak accident. Went on with my day, and then the news started coming in. We got into the vendor meeting. I was working in Arlington on a high rise, and we could see from the end of that corridor, we could see the smoke coming up from the Pentagon. And I started hearing about how, this was right by the Courtyard Metro Center, how they're starting to stop trains. And all my team that was on site, I said, guys, I don't care what the company says, you're going to leave now, before all the trains stop. And in about 15, 20 minutes, the company made an announcement, guys, start leaving. Luckily that day I brought my minivan. I packed 7 people into that car, squished in, and we started driving. By that time, the metro had already stopped. And I remember it got slowed down to a crawl, and I remember praying that there wouldn't be a chemical or some kind of a biological attack, because we had all have been sitting ducks. What I do remember about that day is, even as the tension increased among all of us, and we went through, and partway through, I'd been able to call my wife, told her I was on my way back, but then the cell phone stopped working. But everyone that I saw at that time, we all came together. I'm sure there were instances Niharika talked about where people shoving and taking away cabs, but there were a lot of good things that came. And when we came under crisis, people came together. I remember people I'd never met before. They came in, I brought them up to the Vienna metro station, the first west, so they could at least get in a bus or their cars parked out there. Some of them offered to pay. And I said, come on, we're all family here. We came through it. It was the longest drive home. And I remember just being glued to the TV. Like, this can't be happening. And this was probably about couple of days. All of us, all we could do was watch that TV and say, this is not real. This is surreal. Yet today I look back, and and I remember every little detail. It's more real 20 years ago than it was during that day.
To follow up with Shirish, that day America was one. There was no blue or red. Everyone came together on the Capitol Hill, and I remember when I reached home around my neighborhood, or even the shops, restaurants were all shut down. Everyone was wondering what the heck is going on. And I remember when the dusk came evening in the neighborhoods, people were holding candles and standing in front of the communities, um, mourning and surprised, shocked, emotional, because we are all Americans in the end of the day. We are a family, and something never could have imagined happened. And that's why I say life changing event. After that, we never trusted anyone, even today. All federal governments are very secured. I remember I could cross through NIH campus from Wisconsin to Old Georgetown Road. There was a theater in Building 10 where which we even rented for Nati Bharati for the plays and or some other plays. All that was enclosed. Airports changed. We had to open up your belts, shoes, liquids, you name it. We all know that. So that day life changed, and we still remain a little insecure. I remember a friend of mine was visiting from India, and he said that he was going to change planes in Detroit. And I used to go there every month for my meetings. I was with EDS. And I said, "Oh, well, I'll come to the airport and see you." And I even went to the gate. You could go to the gate to bring your guest. You remember that?
Yes.
And he came out. We sat in a cafe. His flight was in an hour. Because he met me, he was so happy. We rescheduled his flight on standby. There's no standby anymore. You remember you could get a flight on standby? And he took a 1 hour more later flight to Dallas. And all that liberty was gone,
Yep.
finished. I mean, so many things changed. So now my follow-up question is, and we can go in one by one. What changed for you in everyday life, like since then? What is it different for you now that you were prior to 9/11?
The loss of innocence. Everything we took for granted, that comfort level, we went away. The whole feeling that here in the United States, those kind of things we see on TV, yeah, it happened somewhere in a Middle East conflict. It happened somewhere else. Well, here it was right in our backyard. That part has never really gone away. You know, it's improved. We've gone a little further. That has been there. And the other, in a way, somewhat unfortunate thing is we became numb. We saw that kind of an attack. We've seen other attacks. And after that first horror, maybe those other things, I look around the world, you saw what happened in Mumbai. It didn't have as much of a reaction around the world as that did. And I think that's unfortunate because we should never, ever tolerate or think this is, it's just another terrorist attack. And unfortunately, I think some of that has happened out here. We've become blasé. Just maybe that shock of it was so much that we got desensitized to protect ourselves. And I think that's unfortunate. These are some of the things that have changed and kind of last through. And I hope at some time we move beyond that. Any of the things that drove us apart, we can get beyond it. And we should never, ever, ever think, just another terrorist attack. These are human beings. These are real people, neighbors, family, who lost their lives. And let's hope we regain that level of sensitivity again.
Niharika?
I have a bit of a reaction to what Shirish said and what you said, Manoj, but I am very interested in learning what about Surinderji's transformative experience. So I'm going to give the mic to him and then come back to me because I feel I really want to listen to you, Surinderji.
Yeah, I was saying I reached home and my wife was still not there. And I was sitting in front of TV and just watching the same images, as you know, what the TVs normally they do, repeat the same images. And I was thinking that at the very start of a new century, this is such a big thing which has happened in America. It is, if you look at other major events like Civil War or things like that, it's going to change the lives of people forever. It's not going to be the same. One thing that particularly came to my mind was the question of literature, because I just mentioned Civil War, because Civil War was the reason why we had so many great writers who wrote some great novels, short stories. You can fill a whole library with that. So at that particular moment, I was thinking that somebody is now thinking of writing a poem. Somebody is thinking of writing a short story or a novel. Then what I am doing sitting here, I should be also thinking something. Maybe I had not published a short story book or novel by then, but then my mind started thinking about some possibilities. What can I write about? So there was an outline of story that came to my mind at that particular day. I took some note and forgot about it. But in the years to come, I continued to work on it. It took a long time because when you are thinking of writing a novel, it's a very, very difficult journey. And I had not done that before. So I wrote a novel was called Endless Life. It was published in America in 2012. It took quite some time to find a publisher, an agent, an editor. It took a long time. Uh, Now the story was about my main character is an American Indian woman who is professional, who is single, but she has a son, 21-year son, who was an intern in the towers, and he died in the towers. So this was such a shock for her that she had to rebuild her life because she was totally broken, and she goes back to India and starts to kind of put the pieces together. So what I thought was I had written a 9 novel novel. So I was very happy that it may have taken many years, but I finally did it. But the editor at the publishing house told me, sorry, you didn't write a book about 9/11. You wrote women's fiction. This is a story of a woman. And you shouldn't be even doing that because you're a man. Write something different. So even two, three reviewers pointed out that it is a case of gender appropriation. It should not have been done. Anyway, that I was never thinking about that. Another thing was that in India, they don't care about these things. So the Indian edition was published in 2015 or so. So, but at this time, both the editions are out of print. So, because of the COVID, I wrote another novel where the theme was more on urban pollution. It was about Delhi, the kind of pollution you find there. So, that manuscript has been accepted by a major publisher in India. And my editor there looked at this book, it is Endless Life. She says, if your urban pollution novel becomes a success, I promise that I will bring this book to life again. So I put my, I keep my fingers crossed. Maybe it was a stimulus that 9/11 provided and put me to work on this. So that was quite transformative because I had not written a novel up to that point, but because I had written the first novel, so that's why I was able to write the second one during last year COVID period because there was a lot of time available. So that's my personal story.
I have so many reactions to that, but first, talking about what Manoj said earlier and Shrish, what you were talking about. For me, I grew up in India, and I perhaps have not been in the United States as long as you all have. As I said before, I wasn't a U.S. citizen. So these were not my people. It wasn't my country. My country was still back home. And growing up in my country back home in the 80s and 90s, I had grown up with bomb threats. I had grown up with bombs going off in markets. I had grown up with buses saying, check under your seat. Unable to go to movie theaters. We didn't go to movie halls. We were watching VCR movies at home because a bomb could have gone off in the movie theater. So I wasn't desensitized, but this was not something that I felt that I had lost my liberties on. I didn't feel like I was suddenly my freedom was gone because I was used to living, and I hadn't been in the United States. I'd been in the United States for 2 years up until that point, and I was used to it. So going into the airport was nothing that back home you could do. My dad is in the army. He used to have to get a special pass to enter the airport, and he still does, to even get me to this one particular barrier. So walking up to the gate and having chai with a friend was this amazing thing that I knew happened nowhere else. So once it went away, it didn't really matter to me. It became like any other airport that I was used to. What I gained though was an awareness of being a brown person from abroad, walking down the road, being mistaken for a terrorist or a terrorist sympathizer, or being aware that someone might come and jump me, or not wearing my Indian clothes because I would look too exotic. Up until then, I was just a foreign student studying international relations. So the color of my skin and the way I talked wasn't a problem. People would ask me strange questions like, do you ride elephants? Do you do this back home? Do you have snakes? But no one was viewing me as the enemy. But after 9/11, I became aware that that might be something. So I started getting smaller in my body and the way I would present myself. So I'll leave it there for now.
Shazad?
I've alluded to the fact that, being a Muslim professional, that was something which was very remote in my mind, and there's been a forced reckoning for me to consider that. Prior to that, it was somewhere, as I said before, growing up as an Indian Muslim, I knew the difference of, we spoke Urdu at home and, ate meat, not vegetarian, and had, interest. And culturally, we had some difference. But beyond that, in America, I had never experienced any color prejudice. But the foreignness and questions, and then having to explain in any time something happens, what my view is and why do they hate us. That sort of question, which I feel that I can't possibly represent other people, even of my background, and but that sometimes feels forced. The trouble with never forgetting is that the world moves on, however, and vivid as it may be, I think the terrorism landscape itself has evolved and has moved away. If you really look at the big picture, look at the forest rather than the trees. No terrorist organization or movements last more than 40 years, whether it's Bader Meinhof or the Japanese Red Brigade. It was impossible to feel safe in London in 70s. Lord Mountbatten was killed, the Royal, because of the IRA, and that's history. Two or three generations die in 40 years, and having been forced to reckon with this, I've sort of read a little more deeply into that and look for maybe some optimistic signs, and maybe I'm optimistic, But what I find is that there is increasing antipathy uh, among the Muslim youth in the Middle East, etc., towards terrorism. The fundamentalists who were good in being in opposition have miserably failed to govern. Um, the the uh, uh, the abandonment of faith in the Muslim community on all over the world is faster than any other community. And these are not on the forefront, and not in New York Times or Washington Post that you will read, but if you dig deeper, foreign policy journals and things like that, these things are coming to the fore. So maybe not in my life, but I'm optimistic that it'll die out a natural death, and there's no constituency uh, 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 for that. And as Obama himself said, that more people uh, die in bathtub accidents than the domestic terrorism is more of a threat, and things like that. So as I said before, America was never shocked as it was in 9/11. There were, Hawaii was not mainland. Honolulu, there was loss of 24 or 2,500 lives, but that was full-fledged war and result of it. I had an inkling that surrounded by two vast oceans and two friendly countries on each side, it was going to be a lot of shock, and that's going to make a lot of changes. So I'm actually, maybe counterintuitive. I will actually hope that we do forget this gradually, because I think we're moving in that direction. This is another 10 years or 15 years. This will also die out. No terrorist movement has lasted more than 40 years. So things like ISIS and Al Qaeda, they are headed in the same direction. All evidence points to the direction that this is going the way of IRA and Baader-Meinhof and Red Brigade and Basque separatist movement. It'll be a nuisance here and there. There'll be some African countries where we'll see bombing and things, but maybe I'm too optimistic. But that's my read on it.
Only thing we have is hope, and we are always have to be optimistic. We have no other choice. I have a question, medical question for you. So after 9/11, what, and of course everything is in privacy, but generally, did you get a lot of calls or patients who wanted to talk about this? They were afraid, feared, and lost.
I'm not sure if there was a higher incidence, but the existing and new patients who came to see me, it usually it was something that you would spend 5 to 7 minutes. In a 45 to 50-minute evaluation, if you're spending 5 minutes, spending 10% of time on things which are which are not personal but part of the societal landscape, and it also, I noticed a growing curiosity on the part of my patients once they knew of my background, and of course my name, Rahman, and all that, being Indian and all that. A growing curiosity on the part of the patient about what I thought, and so on. So actually, that provided for but usually therapist or physician, I'm not a therapist, being a psychopharmacologist, generally don't reveal much of themselves, but this being again a forced reckoning, it had some positives, like people were genuinely interested in my background, and it actually called for some extra bonding, as opposed to this Indian psychopharmacologist who they see every 3 months or something, but who is not their therapist. So I think that there was it deepened some relationships with some of my patients, and I found these private conversations very illuminating and satisfying, because when seeing someone who was Muslim but not scary and just not a human being like them, um, you know, it kind of it actually reassured them rather than alarmed them. So in that regard, I had some positives.
I mean, I'll add a little bit of my own feeling about what it has changed me as a person. So I was a U.S. citizen. I had already worked on few government contracts, and for me, it was also patriotism. I fully even today thank America for my life, for the whatever I own, the life I enjoyed. I went around the world on contracts or the opportunities it presented to me. I'm very grateful to US, and so there was a lot of patriotic feeling as well in me. I was, I mean, a lot of young people. I don't know whether you know this. After 9/11, joined the defense forces because of 9/11, and and now I'm a little bit, as a person, feel insecure. When I go to places, I want to make sure that I'm not in crowded places. you know People know where Americans hang out, the expats hang out. I like to keep like a little bit of distance from there. Leopold Cafe is a very good example in Mumbai, where most foreigners hang out and see what happened. So yes, it changed me as a person. I've reached airport in more in earlier. We were talking about it before the call started. So going forward, but everyone has to be optimistic. Of course, we are dealing with another life-changing event, which we'll talk in 2 weeks, pandemic, and how this is all around the world and not just specific to US. So, any feelings like that, like Shirish?
So, that insecurity to some extent, but as I go through this, and one of the things, part of me is optimistic. Shazad, like, as you said, I don't think this will last forever. And I'll tell you one of the things that makes me optimistic. Yes, there were some horrible, horrible incidents where, a Sikh gentleman, they thought he's Middle Eastern and was killed. But this is not the real America. And here's what I mean by that. In any country, there's always the malcontents who sees an opportunity like this to express their vitriol or their dissatisfaction. But what I saw all throughout, for the most part, were neighbors coming in, looking at each other, taking care of each other, and it didn't matter where you're coming from. Personal experience, a lot of times I get mistaken for being Middle Eastern. At that time, every so often I'll grow a beard or take it off. After 9/11, shortly after that, I decided I'd grow a beard. And I never thought twice about what am I being profiled, what will I look at. Now, certainly, every time I got to the airport, short of being strip searched, and I was always, went through a heavy amount of checking. But frankly, I didn't mind that. This is the time when people are so tense and scared. They're trying to figure out what's going on. That didn't bother me because as I work with everyone else, I did not feel that there is an inherent thing to be afraid of from my neighbors, from people in general. Yes, there are idiots all over the place in every country, and there's someone who's dissatisfied, they have an ugly life, or a criminal mentality, and they'll try to run around. I go by a 7-Eleven, and people run around me calling me Muhammad. Okay, call me Muhammad. It doesn't matter. It was an expression of a couple of juvenile delinquents. But overall, I'm optimistic that we will come together, that we see, beyond all these other differences. But it's going to take some time. In the meantime, that what I mentioned before, I want to guard against not getting blasé. Niharika, I was there in India for a part of that time. I went through those transistor bombs in the buses, right? I remember when Indira Gandhi was assassinated. I was in college. We took all our friends and we hid them in our rooms because they were idiots They're miscreants, dissatisfied with their own life, trying to come in and take advantage of that. But just like them, people, incidents like this bring out the miscreants, but more important, they bring out the good in people. We look out for each other. And whether it's in India, we're a family then among people, whereas in the US, I still look at all my neighbors as families. I know their mothers, their grandmothers, we interact with each other. And I think that's what's going to help America and the world grow beyond this eventually.
Yes, we
I
have.
remember,
Mhm.
I
Sundarji, go
remember
ahead.
when, just one, I remember when 9/11 happened, Economist had a cover story, which is the Twin Towers on fire, and they had a heading that they world changed. And one common feeling was that, the world has changed forever. And that means we have to live with this threat of international terrorism for all times to come. But as Shazad pointed out, the terrorist movement, they don't last forever. So at this time, we feel rather confident that the international terrorism which we saw in the early part of the century, it may be now thing of the past. It's not going to last. But what is troubling at this time, which nobody could anticipate, no analyst ever said that America, after going through that period of great unity, would one day find domestic terrorism as a major threat. So this is kind of a new dimension, and I think people are trying to live with this new reality. But it is something which is going to be an issue to my mind for many years. And I also feel that the younger generation, people, boys and girls who are in the early 20s, Generation Z, they have not experienced 9/11 or things like that as we experience. So when they think about these events, they have a totally different perspective. So they don't feel the same way. But at this time, I'm really troubled that not only in America, but all around the world, the right-wing terrorism operation against minorities is posing a big threat, and I don't know what the solution for that.
What you said just now, Surendraji, that makes
Mm,
me think I'm so grateful that during the time of 9/11, there was no Facebook, there's no Twitter,
mm,
internet
mm,
wasn't as prevalent.
mm,
'Cause that's where these emotions are can go viral. They get
mhm.
capitalized on, misused.
Right,
You see what we're
right,
seeing today, what you just alluded to, Surendraji,
right, right,
is a direct effect of
right.
how quickly things get out of control and how they're being misused,
Mhm,
how easily people can be manipulated.
mhm.
So that's
Right.
something to be very grateful for. God
Yeah,
help us if there had been a Facebook and Twitter at
yeah.
9/11.
That's a great point, Shirish. But I also feel just like the terrorists, the 40-year time span or plus minus, that these technologies are also new. So there is a lot of hype. People are
Mm,
really anxious and want to do it. But over time, even the use of these will go down. People will become a little mundane. I hope
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
It will go down over the years. At least that's what I'm hoping for. Any other point anyone wants to make, Niharika?
I was just going to say, I think that, technology is going to keep evolving. I mean, who knew 17, 18 months ago that we would be so comfortable, popping onto Zoom or StreamYard or whatever and having these conversations in this very inclusive manner. And I have to say, 9/11 was a point in my life. I was a student. Now I am a senior federal employee. I have taken an oath to the flag of the United States to protect this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. I serve the public. So, in this position now, I represent the United States to foreign governments. And it's a very different life and perspective. And so, I'm a proud American. I remain a proud Indian as well. But I have found that there are things that change that will evolve. And Shazad talked about how things evolve and tourism fades in one way or the other. But 9/11 brought us together. It definitely did. We stood as one country. COVID has divided us. And I know this is not a COVID conversation, but I can't help but bring that
Mm.
into the picture because we can't see one without the other. 9/11 changed us, and now we are in this situation that has changed us again and shown us how we are so divided. But before that, we had another milestone. We had an election in 2016 that created a lot of division that did not really exist. It hyped on things, it told us things that came out of that. We had Muslim bans, we had other, countries being called enemies. So the country has gone through shifts. We remain patriotic Americans. We are also, as Surendraji mentioned, that, out of great crisis comes great literature and great
Mhm.
music. Because when times are good, you don't really get anything wonderful coming out in the world of art and literature. And it remains to be said, because this is the DC South Asian Arts Council, and I'm glad, Surinderji, you brought it up, that you were inspired to write your book. In the pandemic, we're writing poetry. Manoj, you're organizing events talking about poetry in the pandemic. We're sublimating our feelings. We're bringing it all out. People are reading it. Nobody is biting, fighting, scratching over, you wrote this and I wrote that. People are coming together. So while they're coming together, there's from around the world, there's this incredible divide that we're seeing now that we didn't see in 2001. So that's what scares me more than what happened in 2001.
Another thing I want to bring out is there are several good documentaries which have been made on 9/11, and the latest one, which was screened on the 20th anniversary by CNN. I would
Mhm.
encourage everyone to see that documentary. It's the victims, family members, or friend who spoke in a sound booth when right after 9/11, and then they came back after 18, 19, 20 years back, and now they're talking about looking back what happened. They of course they've aged, but the the optimistic or the lessons learned from 9/11, what they've taken away, what they call is for the rest of their life. And I would ask all of you to maybe say something about, if you look back and now of course you're looking forward, what was the takeaway which will remain with you with the rest of the life?
One is regarding the human spirit. People in our own life, we go through ups and downs. There are some moments when we totally feel helpless, hopeless. I remember I did some counseling work for our staff members because World Bank is a multicultural, multi-ethnic organization. There were particularly female staff members from Middle Eastern countries who felt really depressed because they were not sure how the religion factor is going to play out. So, talking to them, one thing which came across was that we have the capacity to cope with very adverse events, and those conversations are still very alive in my mind. And I find, although people were very depressed, they were also hopeful. And also at that particular point, nobody was thinking citizen, non-citizen. Everybody who lived here, whether you are on a student visa or you are World Bank staff or UN staff, everybody felt America is my home today and my home has been attacked. And they felt very strongly about it. But there was also feeling that we are going to recover, we are going to do better, we are going to be more safe in this country. So I think that is one positive factor we have to keep in mind. Although these times when where we are living today are not good too, there are too many dangers at this time too.
Shirish,
So yeah, I mean, as Surendraji said, there is what I take away from 9/11 is a level of hope and resilience. When I say that it's as real today, or more real today, even than it was on 9/11,
Mhm.
that's a part of me that I think I want to keep. It's not because I'm holding a grudge, but you know, it reminds us of how fragile life can be,
Mhm.
and based on that, to cherish each other, to take care of each other, go beyond the idiots who come in and use that for their own personal gains. Those are criminals. Let's call it what they are. Those are not. Let's not confuse a religion or a set of people as being the sort of terrorists. Criminals are criminals. That's got nothing to do with religion. That's as true in I don't care which area it is. And that's what I took away from 9/11 and I keep with me. Do not confuse criminals with a particular set of people and to recognize how we all came together that day. And let's hold on to that to help us get through this current crisis, to get beyond the negativity, the divisiveness that some of the social media has been misused for. And just like terrorism has a life cycle of maybe 40 years, as you said, Manoj, let's hope the maturity in how we deal with social media and protecting against the divisiveness that's being created
Mhm.
will come through as well. And we're human beings at the end of the day.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Being an optimist, I also see the other side of the coin. Just as I kept talking about terrorism of all kinds having a finite life and fading away, the Islamophobia that I feared was going to be through at least my life because I was middle aged by the time this happened. That seems to be fading also as more and more people uh, uh, or sort of know who is who. For example, I couldn't watch Bill Maher comedy show on real time on HBO, but his Islamophobia was like he couldn't talk about anything but that. But week after week, having guests like Salman Rushdie or Fareed Zakaria, or these comedians and Aziz Ansari and other. So the more people know that no, that other than terrorists who are comedians, movie actors, politicians, Lina Khan is the chairman of FTC, and she's going after the technology breakdown. So lawyers, there are about 80,000 US physicians who are of a Muslim background. So as people began to be more curious and focus on who are these villains, they have also learned that, well, it's not so much, the reality is more complex. And, I haven't seen Bill Maher talk about, Islamophobia in the last 3 or 4 years. Not a week would go by. I liked his new rules and the comedy and all of that, but uh, that was annoying. So I generally feel that the other side of the coin, besides that, even the Trump Muslim ban, for example, I think was a dying convulsion of the ultimate Islamophobe, and he's been a racist. I mean, knowing that the five Central Park Five who were innocent, he took out a full-page ad in New York Times, asking them to be put to death penalty. At that time, it said that he knew that they were innocent, and so this is a known racist. People talk about 2043 when the demographic changes will make America a country where no one is in majority. So there's a lot of this right-wing thing at least in America, is a reaction to that because they're terrified of 2043. and what will happen to us. But London and New York City have not been majority white for 40 years, and if anything, the white minority in those two cities have prospered and actually done well, because being in minority, they're sort of, so in general they have prospered. I also noticed that the people who are, nobody is opposed to it talks about Sharia law and things like that in New York City or Washington D.C. But yes, from deep in Arkansas and Tennessee, you see, there's great loathing of people who don't know anybody who is a Muslim or about Sharia law, etc. That that they'll pass state laws saying that we don't want any Sharia law in this state. Most of the Sharia law, by the way, applies to divorce settlement and even Muslim countries, and property distribution among siblings after a parent dies and things like that. So there's one main things, there are 9 or 10 states. Most of them happen to know very few, Muslims. So what I'm saying is that in New York City and other places where people, which are melting pots, people are not so afraid or not so Islamophobic, because once you get to know people, you see that there are varieties of people, some bad, some good. And as somebody said, that the arc of evil runs straight through our heart. There's no us versus them. The good and evil, we have, it's both within us. So I remain optimistic that even this domestic alienation and pandemic has highlighted some of that. That's also, there's another side to that, and I think we'll get to that.
And what I like is that at least all five of us are optimistic and positive, and there's a lot of good everywhere. Even when I traveled and here in US, there are a lot of good people, a lot of uh, helping each other. I mean, Americans are known for their philanthropy, and I think the priorities are shifting a little. I think for all of us, environment is a big one,
Mhm.
beyond the virus, and everyone is coming together to come up with the new technologies and all of that. And I am so happy that what we have learned from these life-changing events, 9/11, now pandemic, even in between the elections, is that people are there's a resiliency, there is hope, and like I always say in international travel, when I went to different countries, the middle class family has the same sort of requirements: roof on the head, good clean food on the table, and good education for the children. Basic same. They might be wearing different clothes, they might be talking different language, behaving in a different way for a certain cultural event, but in the end of the day, everyone wants to be honest, everyone wants to be a good person. It's just the environment and the politics and then all the other factors sometimes play around, religion and all that. But in the end of the day, we'll all triumph, and hopefully this will be all behind us. So any last minute before we wrap up, anyone wants to say anything, or I'll
I'd
start.
like to, Manoj, just to, on the riding the wave of hope that Shehzad mentioned and Surinderji mentioned Gen Z. I have a great deal of hope in our children because it's not us. It's our kids who are seeing beyond color. It's our kids who are seeing
Mhm.
beyond race. And if you talk, I have a 13-year-old. If I talk to him about race, he doesn't see color. He doesn't understand whether it's gender identity or it's equity, diversity, inclusion, acceptance. Our kids are teaching us to be those people. So I continue to learn from my son. I see the divine in my son as I do in other people's children, and am entrusting them to make us better people.
Very nice. Good wrap up. So
Yeah.
I always used to end my chit chat with Manoj. If you remember, life is short, be happy, and have no regrets. Thank you all very much for your time, and I
Thank you.
really appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manoj.
Rashid.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
pulling this
Thank
together,
you.
Manoj.
Stay safe, and like I said, take care of your good care of yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.